Okay, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Ari Lewis. One of the co-founders of Greenblock Group. We're a strategic communication firm. And I also write a blog twice a week focused on personal branding. I like to describe it as mastering the art of engagement for working professionals. So each week I host a webinar with a personal branding expert. This week I have Dave Loomis on. So, Dave is a good friend of mine who I've known for a while, and I thought he'd be a perfect person to talk about helping find your voice. So I'll turn it over to Dave, and he'll give his introduction and talk about some of his work, and then we'll jump into questions. And I like to keep this conversational and a dialogue. So if anyone has any questions, just feel free to use the Q&A chat. And for whatever reason, if you can't attend the whole webinar, I have a YouTube channel where I record this and post it. So I'll send that all in an email. So thanks for coming on, Dave, and over to you.
Absolutely. I'll try and make my intro sort of short so that it can be, much more give and take rather than just me droning on. I've been in marketing for many, many years, probably too long. It's been highly enjoyable. I've touched all sorts of different parts of marketing throughout my whole career, in the B2C world and the B2B world. And it's been great. One of the things that I have always been really interested in is personal branding. It didn't always have that title. I mean, if you think about it, in a lot of ways, the concept's been around since the beginning of time. I mean, cavemen walked around and they wanted to make a good impression on somebody, and things that they did probably did or didn't impress other people in the way that they intended. And but we have a choice, in my opinion, to define our personal brand. The interesting thing, if you think about it, is we really don't have a choice whether or not to have a personal brand. we have one whether we want it or not. So people are going to perceive us the way they will. And also, we have this old saying that you shouldn't judge a book by its cover. But obviously, that's true when you can consciously think about that. But we all do. And so we have to just accept the fact that there's a little bit of that out there, but that we can well, I don't want to say control, but we can influence others' perceptions of us, and we can be intentional about it. And it has to do with your career too. I mean, it's not like we're all sitting around with time on our hands, and that's our life. Unless you're like a professional Instagram, influencer. We all have jobs. We're day jobs. We're at our jobs. How can we develop a personal brand there? We want to be perceived a certain way internally and externally. We also have aspirations about our careers, right? Like, where do we want to go with our career? Like, we change jobs a lot more now than ever before. And so we can think proactively about that. And along the way, we can think about, this concept, you titled this Finding Your Voice. I think we all can do that. But I think that we have to think about it a little bit. Like, we need to say, okay, who are we targeting, with our personal branding? Who do we want to be? And to me, and we can talk more about this, sorry, but it's a balance. Like, you can't just say, oh, I want to be, X, and it's just like some impossible stretch for you as an individual, or, based on either who you are, your education or career. It has to be somewhat authentic, but it should also be aspirational. So there's a little bit of like core, like who you are, to kind of figure out, and and maximize that. And there's a little bit of like, hey, let's make something happen here. You know, I can control it and I can be really successful.
So thanks so much for that. So I think, you know, one of the things I wrote down that, you know, I don't know how many in who are here today think of themselves like this, is sort of this transition that's happening that you touched on from, you know, I always say you can go work at a company like Progressive, you go there, you graduate, you go work there, and then you retire at 65, you collect your, you know, your pension, and that's that. And that sort of evolved where now, you know, people need to think of themselves as a personal brand. You need to think of yourself like a Progressive. So, you know, for folks out there listening, you know, how do you think of yourself as a personal brand more than just a person? And two, you know, what are the first steps you take to start thinking about that?
Yeah. So the first thing is to remember the 5 words that I think are the most powerful words in business, for business, and also for personal. But this is to apply these 5 words to you, to yourself as an individual. And 5 words are these: marketing is everything we do. That kind of, it ties back to what I was just saying about perception. I mean, you just took a sip of water. That says something about you. You know, people that drink water, it's a healthy drink. You know, you're probably athletic. You know, whatever it is. You know, everything you do as a person, everything that you say that comes out of your mouth is part of your personal brand. I know some people who love to sort of drop the F-bomb, you know, constantly. Okay, totally fine. If that's who you are, that's who you want to be, and the people that you're trying to get in with act like that, that's fantastic. Go for it. But if you think that that's probably going to, you know, hold you back or have you perceived a certain way, then, you know, you might want to think again about that.
And it's funny, and I apologize. I'll probably interrupt you every so often, but
Please, no, you should definitely interrupt me.
Before we started, Dave and I were talking about this water brand called Liquid Death. So you guys can look it up, and I'll send it after. There's a company called Liquid Death. They make bottled water. That's it. It's just bottled water. But they've done a really good job, and a lot of people drink it because they branded themselves as this, you know, special water. And that's a commoditized product at the end of the day. Yes, there are differences in qualities of water, but I think, you know, to what you're saying is, you know, we all have this unique edge, but that edge really comes from marketing, and we need to focus on how we're perceived in the marketplace in order to succeed on that level.
Yeah. So the second question, you sort of had a 2-parter, which was, how do you kind of think of yourself as a personal brand? And my answer was, you know, marketing is everything we do. Don't forget it. And then the second thing you said is, how do you actually even, like, where do you start? And there's something that I can send you that you could send to the participants. It's in a little PowerPoint, but I can send it to you like in something that's digestible. But it talks about it's a little chart that talks about 4 different steps to kind of achieving a personal brand. And there are 4 words that start with the letter A. So the first is assessment. And that's to figure out basically who you are, like, and how you're perceived now, and your key strengths. And, you know, there's all sorts of assessment tools out there. A lot of people get them through their work or other things, but actually, you can do it like kind of like a very easy way, a very low tech way. And that's one of the ways that I did it. So years ago, I actually sent an email to like 15, I did my kind of own 360-degree assessment, right? So I sent like this email to a whole bunch of my friends, a whole bunch of my family members, and a whole bunch of my coworkers. And I just said, would you please answer the 2 following questions? And I think my questions were something like, what do you think I'm best at? And then my second question was, what, if you had to come up with one word to describe me, what would it be? That was it. 2 questions. I got all the results. I put them into a spreadsheet. I like coded them so that I could, like, if they were close to the same thing, I sort of made them the same thing. And I made these buckets, and then I came up with my own like personal assessment of like how people perceive me and my strengths. It was actually kind of surprising. A couple things. I didn't know I was,
we're
perceived by that.
What's the expression? We're blind to the forest, or the we can't
see the forest from the trees, right?
Exactly.
Because all we see is the trees, but we don't realize there's this big forest, right? Exactly. So the step 1 is assessment. So you can do it professionally, you can do it through online things, you can do it yourself. Just kind of think through, like, who are you? What are your strengths? And then there's the second A is aspiration. Like, you probably don't want to be stagnant. Like, you would want to be more of one of those things. Or if somebody says that let's just say that you didn't know it, but somebody called you sloppy, you're laid back. But you don't want to really be perceived as laid back anymore. You've hit a point in your career where you want to be perceived as like a go-getter, an ambitious person, whatever it is. So you write that down too. So write down, kind of what your aspirations are. The third is articulation, which is actually writing, like literally writing down what you think those things are, like distilling it down, including like kind of writing your own little vision statement and maybe even a tagline for yourself, so that if somebody asked about you, you've kind of got your own elevator speech. I was actually talking to somebody today on a Zoom call about this. She's like one of the most successful people. She's one of the highest ranking people in the U.S. military. She used to be an aide to Clinton. Fantastic person. She's still not sure about how to exactly what her her tagline is, and hey, it's not an easy thing for almost anybody, but it's like fun to talk through these things with people in real life and kind of help actuate that.
And I think
the fourth, by the way, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. I wanted to add to that, because something and I'll forget is that for so many, you're talking about like articulation, you're talking about writing this down. It's so important to make sure that you actually go and write it down and go through the steps that Dave's talking about, because I think a lot of people, they'll go and talk about it, and they'll say stuff, but they're not really concretely thinking about it. And one of the great things about writing and bouncing feedback back off others is it forces you to get out of your mind and out of that paradigm in your head, and actually act on what you're saying. And there's this one writer I really like named David Perel, and he talks about having a personal monopoly. So like, I'm the writing guy, I'm the branding guy, I'm the book guy, whatever that is. So I think, to add to that, you really want to articulate yourself and, be that person that is the X guy. So when people come to you, when people, you definitely don't want to be the jack of all trades, master of none. You need to have that niche, own that niche, and then figure out how to expand from there. But go back.
I could not agree more. I'm so glad you brought that up. Like, this idea of focus is so hard. There's so much power in that, though, that if you can find something that's your sort of badge, what it does is it creates this recognition, and there's power, and it's scary, because what it does is when you do that, you risk sort of not badging yourselves as all the other things that you could badge yourself at. I mean, it's the same thing with marketing a company. So many clients that I work with, that it's very tempting to say that you're the best price, that you're the highest quality, you have the best service. I mean, it goes on and on and on, right? Because you want to say do all these things. But if you just said one of those things, that would help you deliver that message, right? Even though you might be all the other things. Like when I say Volvo cars, what do you think of?
I think of Sweden, but I don't know if that's what everyone else thinks of.
Well, they are
the best
they
example.
are Swedish. They are Swedish, but they're also known for safety. They have been over the years.
Yeah.
And but there's lots of other, Harley Davidson. It's like they're not trying to be a lot of different things. They're trying to be sort of one thing. But I think to the extent that we can own some space, some talent, some go-to is a really, really cool idea.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that I totally agree on. I didn't want to cut you off on the fourth point that you were getting to.
No. The fourth is actually, it's kind of one of the hardest ones. It's like activation, which is making it happen. Like and this kind of ties into something that I think that's really important here, because the activation part is a tactic, okay? And people are so tempted to just jump right in and do tactics. This goes with, this is human nature, and it's marketing of anything, a company or a person. But if a lot of you that are listening say, oh, okay, I'm going to have a stronger personal brand and I need to start tomorrow. It's so tempting to say, yeah, I just need to be more active on social media. So I'm going to be on LinkedIn more. I'm going to build out my profile. I'm going to do this, do that. Those are all good things. It's a tactic though. And tactics without strategy don't really get you anywhere. So you have to do the strategic work first. And in this case, those are those first 3 A's of the assessment, the aspiration, and articulation. So figure out who you are, who you want to be, and write it down. And then then do the things. Because when you have that, that's like your roadmap. It's kind of like going on a trip without an actual destination. I think somebody said, like, if you're doing that, you'll always get there. If you're going somewhere and you don't know where you're going, you'll always get there.
Well, I think with what you're saying, a couple things. One, strategy is so important. And I was listening to Matthew Kobach, who's the head of social for the New York Stock Exchange, and one of the things that he always talks about is think about strategy first and then tactics. Similar to what you were saying, and specifically on the strategy side, going back to that niche, is really about adding value to that audience, right? So like, when people talk about strategy, I think it's so important, and people don't realize that is you don't have to tell the world about you. Focus on some really small niche. And if you add value to that, you can build a community from that. And I think tactically too, it's also starting really small. So it's something like, okay, my goal, and Jillian Smith, who was on last week, talked about this. My goal is to just, I'm going to tweet once a day. And I'm going to tweet about this strategy that I'm focused on. And then as you get more comfortable, you go into, I'm going to tweet twice a day, or I'm going to write a headline, or whatever that is. So I think, for everyone in the chat, you don't have to, have this grand plan. It develops naturally. And it is really important to, as you think about strategy, focus on a niche and then just start small on the tactics side.
Right. And choose something that you have some passion about, because you're going to want to be motivated. You're not going to want it to seem like drudgery. You're going to want it to be like something where if you dive into this kind of stuff, pretty soon a couple hours have passed and you don't really even notice it, that you go into a zone on it. If it's something that you feel like is a chore to either learn about or to do or what have you, then maybe it's not like the right badge or whatever for you. I've got a great story of like really from me when I'd say somewhere around 2000 or something like that, I became super interested in the field of innovation, of product innovation, like the philosophy behind it and thinking and so forth. I was working full time at the time at NACCO Industries, which is a big holding company here in Cleveland at the time. And my role didn't have anything to do with innovation, really. I just saw it was just an interest area of mine. And it was sort of tangential to what I was doing. I was an internal consultant to different subsidiary companies. But I knew that it was going to be vital to each of these subsidiaries. So I started reading a lot. And then I, would track down authors that I really liked and tried to either contact them or meet them in person. If they were speaking at a conference or whatever, I'd try and go to that conference and I'd meet them and talk to them and try and get into groups. I formed my own innovation breakfast group, and I just invited people, including a couple of these authors, to come and just, and talk to it. If there was ever innovation articles,
And by the way,
I would just.
I want to interrupt. I love that of just inviting people. I think, for those out there, it's such a great tactic. Don't be afraid to go into someone's, DM them on Twitter, email them, connect with them on LinkedIn, and ask for their advice. Because I think that's a great way to connect and meet with people. And many people, they want to give back. They want to help. So I really like that, that breakfast idea.
They really do. And so anytime I had there were articles on innovation or what have you, I'd send them around internally. Pretty soon, the CEO of our company, if there was an article that he saw about innovation, he would send it to me. And so that I became the innovation guy because there wasn't another one. And I ended up having this cross subsidiary conference that I organized. It was a 2 or 3 day conference where 50 people came in from all our subsidiaries, and we talked about innovation and practices and had a bunch of these authors come in. So it grew into that. It's totally doable, but I had the strategy first. I didn't just go, oh, I just want to be known for something,
Yeah. And I think, that's another thing too. While you did have the strategy, you refined it over time. I think don't be afraid to fail when you're thinking about strategy. For many people out there, it's a learning process of seeing, what do I enjoy? What am I good at? Where can I add value? So, as you discovered, you sort of had this pivot of, oh, I'm going to innovation, and that wasn't, where you were before previously in your career. So I like how you sort of had that shift. And by the way, if anyone has questions, I'm going to take one now, but feel free to use the chat. So one of the questions in the chat is, social media, it doesn't necessarily capture, your brand. How else can you sort of talk about who you are, but besides, social media strategy?
Yeah, good, really good question. So I think it's multifaceted. So I think you need to get out there in person. I think, we'll just consider the current times and social distancing and stay-at-home order as a, not a fluke. I mean, elements of it will persist for some time, if not forever, who knows? But I mean, at the end of the day, getting out into the public and meeting people and networking and socializing that way is good. And you would do that intentionally too, with people or with groups that coincide with your interest area or the brand that you're trying to develop. So that's one thing. I think content marketing in general, I consider to be a much broader umbrella than social media. I would say social media is one thing that fits under that umbrella. And then there's different social media, platforms, but there's other things under that content marketing umbrella, like blogging, and even the word blog, it doesn't really matter what it's called. You could publish something on LinkedIn and call it an article, whether it's a blog or whatever. It doesn't really matter. It's content or video. You know, Ari's been doing a lot with video now on YouTube and things like that. Any way to get yourself sort of out there. And it doesn't even have to be just you. If you want to interview someone, it's so cool. I mean, if you think about the time that we're living in and the access we have to actually not just create content, but broadcast it. I mean, we could never do that if you rewind 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever. There's so much at our fingertips. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and you know, someone has a follow-up question to that, but before I ask it, you know, I think yeah, it's so important to what Dave is saying of, you know, just start doing stuff, just start doing content. I think, you know, like this series I'm doing now, I just woke up and I was like, no one's doing any content. I'm gonna start doing content on this, and this is my fifth, and you know, I'm getting great guests. I have some, you know, guests like Dave, and I have some more great guests that are coming on in the future. So it's really as easy as that. And if one person shows up, you know, one person shows up, but then, you know, take that
Doesn't
content.
matter.
Yeah, and you can also take that content and repurpose it. So every time I do a video, I write a blog post and then I turn it into YouTube videos. So figure out how to repurpose that. But one of the questions in the chat is does blogging still work? And I think, I guess before, you know, you answer that, Dave, I want to touch on that. You know, if you think of blogging, right, there's different aspects of what Dave's talking about. Twitter used to say they were a micro blog. You know, content comes in many different ways. So it's sort of just thinking about how you want to distribute that and the platforms. But I'll you know, you're the expert, Dave. So you know, you tell us your thoughts.
I think you have to decide for yourself what the definition of work is, like what you're trying to accomplish by doing your blogging. So let's just say that part of your blogging was just to learn how to blog and be a better writer, or to get some things down on paper to help crystallize how your thoughts and how you feel about things. And your goal wasn't to get a ton of followers necessarily, or even to like get business out of it or anything like that. That's a different goal than, yeah, I'm going to blog because I want leads for my business. So think about the goal. Like in 2010, I had an actual blog on a blogging platform called TypePad. It's actually still there. But I wrote a little essay every day for a year. It was called A Word on Marketing. And I remember this like friend who's she's a music writer, asked me, she's like, what are you trying to accomplish? And I said, she just couldn't get her mind around the fact that I was spending like at least maybe an hour a day, early morning, just writing these essays. And I was just like, well, I can't give you a good answer except the fact that I needed to do it, to see if I could do it, and to learn to be a better writer, and to just kind of learn by doing. So that was my goal then. Now my goal, if you look at LinkedIn, my LinkedIn or my website, it's to write some fairly serious articles that I would say reflect a little bit more of my philosophy, more confidently, because I have so much more experience now. And if I get some business leads out of it for my marketing consulting business, that's great. So to specifically answer your question, does it work? One article that I wrote a couple months ago, to your point, Ari, you don't need that many hits. Like, you don't need necessarily that many followers. My market is very, very niche. Like, for my marketing consulting, it's in bigger industrial B2B companies. And and the innovation people in them, right? So how many are there? Not that many, really, in the scope of things. So I don't need a zillion followers. I just need the right followers. I got 2 people at 2 companies that are over 500 to $1 billion in sales, that were head of innovation for those target companies, people that I didn't ever even know that called me because of that article. And I had used keywords in my blog, and they just Googled B2B VOC, which is voice of customer, and my article came up.
That's
and
fantastic.
they called me.
Yeah, and
Yeah, and one of them I just signed an NDA with yesterday.
awesome, congrats. And yeah, I've had a similar, success where I've posted content and gotten clients out of it. I think one thing to add to Dave's comment is, when you think about writing, you don't even have to write for anyone. Maybe you just start writing for yourself and start with that and expand.
Right.
Another thing that I know people do, this really only works, I guess you do it at a smaller company too, is you can write and just send it internally. So I know at a lot of banks, they send internal research notes. Now that's due to the fact that they have to, but it's a good way to expand your thinking. But going to the chat, and I hope I don't butcher this question, because I'm not entirely sure if I'm asking it correctly, but someone's asking in the context of, looking for your next role, how do you ensure that, you stay focused, but at the same time, I think a lot of job descriptions, they're overly broad, right? So you see a marketing role and then they're like, oh, I want you to do custom, jack of all trades. And it's like, wait, I thought you're telling me to, be in this niche.
Oh,
Is
good
jack,
question.
how
That's really interesting. That is really interesting. So, right, in a way, like if you follow that advice and be super focused on something, that may be limiting your future options. It is like betting. It's like options, theory or something like that. It's kind of cool question. What I've always done is I've looked at jobs that I think I might want, because if you follow like job descriptions, and some of them you read and you're like, that would kill me if I had to do that. Like, you just don't like it, right? I mean, you've seen them and you're like, oh my God, how can somebody do that job? But some of them you're like, oh man, now that is an amazing job. So what are all the keywords in there? What are the things about those jobs? What are the tasks? Like, just start thinking, if I was to ever apply for that job, and it might be years down the road, what do I have to do now and put in place to get that job? Like, I wanted to, around that time after I was started getting into innovation, I thought, I wouldn't mind teaching, but I'd never done any public speaking whatsoever. So I just said, I think I could come up with the content to teach, but I have to be a good speaker and I have to, get practice and that kind of thing. So I just started trying to line up situations where I could speak publicly, whether it was internally at my company or externally, anywhere, at a church, at a meeting of an organization, a nonprofit, and whatever it is. I just kept doing this and practicing. And I got, and then I went and guest spoke at classes. So to get comfortable at that. And then lo and behold, I was asked to actually be full-time, an adjunct, and have a class at Case. So, I mean, I think you have to be, again, intentional about like what you want to do. But I would be careful about trying to spread yourself too thin and saying you could do everything. You wouldn't be happy doing that anyway. I don't know if that's a really good question or answer to that question, because it is a conundrum.
Yeah, I think it's a good transition to our next question, which, one of the things that I think you touched on is that, like, you don't really want to apply to companies that have these jack of all trade job descriptions. because there's probably cultural issues, cultural fits that exist at those companies. What do you suggest for
Yeah.
people who unfortunately are in roles where they're battling that culture and they're trying to like brand themselves into a niche, but you know, their employees don't get it, or the folks don't get it, or whatever it is. How do you sort of battle that internally when you're already there and trying to carve that out?
Well, it's another toughie. I mean, the reality is that, life is never always 100% the way you want it. And so you're always, the old expression, it's not called, it's called work for a reason. I mean, we all are doing things every day for everything. And I still myself included that, if I had my choice, I wouldn't do, X, Y, Z, this part of it or whatever. So to some extent you have to play the game, and you have to be sort of savvy politically. If you want to stay in the job, I mean, sometimes there's a job that, you're getting paid, you're in a job that's stable. Use that situation to, do a good job while you're there and build up your skills, on the side, and do other things intentionally in addition to that. But unless you're a complete iconoclast, like, and you just want to, sort of hang it up and quit and do something else, which is totally fine too. It's just that just be careful, not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. Do a good job with what you're in, if you have a current situation, right?
Yeah, and I think and by the way, I don't want to have this longer than 50 minutes, an hour. So if anyone has any questions, again, as we wind down, please don't be afraid to put them into the Q&A. But two things that I had that I wanted to touch base on, and I think the last one I'll leave for last. But you had this process on your website: study, learn, create, thrive. Can you talk about that and sort of what that means and how it applies to personal branding and thinking about yourself as a brand?
Sure. So, study, learn, create, thrive really follows that strategy first, tactics second process that we were talking about. So if you think about those 4 A's, the process of personal branding, think about the first 2 that I said, which was the assessment and the aspiration, right? So that's kind of like the study learn part. The articulation is the create, and then when you activate, that's the thrive. The reason why I have those words on my website is because the expression, don't put the cart before the horse. And I actually found a picture once. If you Google it, you could find an actual picture of a cart in front of a horse. Like, not the horse pulling the cart, but, other way around. Obviously the expression exists because that doesn't really work. And it doesn't work in marketing. It doesn't work in branding. It really, honestly, it doesn't work in almost anything in life. You have to assess a situation before making a decision. That doesn't mean you have to slow down and be like a snail. It just means that you don't, ready, fire, aim, no, ready, aim, fire. So that's what it's just to say those 4 words are really about thinking first. What is your brand? Who are you targeting? Who are you? Where do you want to go? Then activate it.
Yeah, and I think my last question for you that I sort of, or last topic area really, is mistakes and lessons. So one being what are some of the biggest mistakes that you think people make when they're approaching their personal brand, and what are some of the personal lessons you've learned over the years, both yourself from a personal branding level, but also lessons you've learned consulting, and Dave's very modest, but Dave's worked with, tons of Fortune 500 companies, and he was the former CMO of Dixon Eden, which is, one of the largest communication firms in Cleveland. So he has a wide array of excellent, client and consulting experience. So, also the lessons there and how they could be applied to personal branding. So I know that's a lot, so we can, sort of break it down.
No, I would say just like, I mean, in a macro sense, without the specific examples, I mean, you're going to run into trouble if that aspiration is too far off of the assessment. Okay. So what am I saying? I'm saying that, why do you want to be somebody who you're not? I mean, own it, you be you, right? I mean, that's a phrase that I hear a lot these days. And people are so much more accepting now too. Yeah, everybody doesn't have to be a clone of somebody else to be successful in anything they do. So what is every single human on this earth is unique. And everybody's career path is incredibly unique. I mean, literally, no one has the exact, job to job, the education, their background, their experience, who they've been in contact with, the timing of that, what they've learned from it. It all defines like who they are. You put it together with their personality and you've got something super, super unique. So I think grabbing onto that uniqueness and being self-confident about it, that is really, really important. And the mistakes come when you're just trying to pretend too much, when that aspiration is like too far off. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no,
and I've done it. I mean, I've tried for stuff that, didn't work out because it was probably just, it wasn't me.
Yeah, and I really like that last line of like, it didn't work out because it wasn't me. Figure out, what you are. And it's funny, someone in the chat actually asked, which I think is a fantastic question, what is that one word that describes you, right? What is you?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Me personally? Optimist.
Optimist. Can you expand on that? Would love to hear that. A bit more on that.
I see almost everything as a glass half full. And I think that it's destructive to be too negative. And there are situations that confront us all, and we have the choice to decide, do we want to let that bring us down, or do we want to figure out a way around it? This person that I was talking to today, who was the senior military person, told me that it's not the situation that defines a person. It's their reaction to it. You can choose to react in lots of different ways. I react optimistically, and it ends up being very, I think, contagious in a good way. I just think that if I have any regret, it's probably not recognizing earlier in my career that I had the ability to actually lead people more and, spread that optimism. I just kind of held back. I was quieter, trying to figure things out, but I probably could have stepped in, more aggressively earlier.
Yeah, and I think, if anyone doesn't have any last questions, I think that's a great place to sort of end it. And perfect timing of 45 minutes, which was my goal of, at the end of the day, be optimistic about your brand and who you are. And I think good things come to that. So, Dave, I really appreciate you coming on. I'm going to send everyone an email after this with Dave's contact info, his LinkedIn, his website, and I'm going to I'll upload the video to YouTube and send you guys a recording of it. Next week, I have Jason Flack on, who is head of partnerships at Steady, which is a growing startup in LA. Their spokesperson is Shaq. They're actually helping transform the peer-to-peer ride sharing space and food sharing space and all that. But I have some amazing other guests coming on. Former head of analytics at Nielsen, who now owns Youngstown Business Journal. Reagan Avon is coming on, who runs a 6,000 person community for women in analytics. So a lot of great guests, and I'll email everyone on that. And yeah, no, thanks again, everyone, for coming on, and hopefully I'll see you next Wednesday. Have a good one.
Yeah, thanks, Ari. Thanks, everybody.